Tonight we're talking about this record. Jerry's Kids, Is This My World? Is this it? Is this my world? That's the question Rick Jones, singer and bassist for Boston hardcore band Jerry's Kids, asks the listener at the end of the 1983 record of the same name, Is This My World? Well, to be honest, asking someone a question 24 minutes after, pummeling them in the face, seems like kind of a lot. You see, this record is heavy. I don't just mean the sound, but the lyrics, the cover, the sequencing, the back cover. Everything about it is just a little different than what was happening in Boston at the time. In my opinion, every release on Exclaim Records is perfect. There's no filler on any of those records except, maybe that spoken word intro to Escape by DYS or that Girls Got Limits song by DYS. Okay, so the DYS guys were a little trouble. So, but maybe they really did spend some time in the Department of Youth Services. It feels like a bad thing to say the Jerry's Kids record is the best record on Exclaim Records, especially so soon after the passing of Al Baril. I always thought the two SSD records kind of stood on their own, though. And, Exclaim Records and SSD are just sort of like one big thing, and they're just kind of on their own pedestal, as they should be. So there's obviously no disrespect there. I hope to do an SSD discography at one point on this channel, so look out for that. This Jerry's Kids record, though, let me tell you, I'm jealous of people who get to hear this record for the first time, especially the first song, I Don't Belong, which starts with, a little noise swelling from the whole band, and then that bass line shows up out of the rubble, the band kicks in, and then, wait, what the fuck is this drummer doing? Brian Betzger, who by the time I started seeing them in 1984, sported one of those shorter, like Massachusetts-style mullets, those types. He kind of looked like, I feel like a lot of hardcore bands had one of those guys that looked like he was like the guy you knew from like the sub shop down the street. For a good example of that, just look at the cover of the second Crumbsuckers record. Or, there was that one guy in Sick of It All. But yeah, Brian Betzger. Even on the back cover where every member of the band is doing something fucking crazy. Rick Jones and the two guitar players, Rockin' Bob Sensi, Chris Doherty, also of Gangrene, is in some sort of crazy action shot where Brian Betzger looks calm, cool, and collected. You can't really see his mullet in this picture, but if you look at pictures of him later on when he was in Gangrene, you'll see the look. And he kind of, I feel like he disappeared off of the music scene around here. Yeah, but so there's really only one way to describe his playing in my mind, and that's like Keith Moon, if, was transported to an early 80s hardcore band. There's not many straightforward drum beats on this record. Fills aplenty for sure, though. And the other pictures, there's Bob Sensi on the ground with, I think it's Choke from Slapshot, giving him this, like, thing in the front. I think that's Choke. Write in the comments if you can confirm that that's Jack Kelly. And then, half of the time, there's the other pictures is Bob Sensi, who half of the time was always, running around on the floor, spinning around on the floor. And, he always had sort of like a 50s rockabilly look. He's a pretty big guy. A few years ago, I was living on the North Shore, back on the North Shore in Massachusetts here, where I am now. And I used to see Bob Sensi on a 10-speed bike early in the morning on my commute to work. And I'd always think, like, all these people driving by have no idea how insane this guy is. In some of the music he wrote. And, I'd always give him a little toot on the horn. And just assumed he couldn't hear because they were kind of a loud band. And then the other guitar player, Chris Doherty, he's literally on top of the crowd in the back of his, I think it's an SG. An SG? Is that an SG? I think it is. Has the has the Circle Jerks sticker on the back. And then you can see him airborne in the background of the Rick Jones picture. What a performer that guy was, Chris Doherty. And these guys were also sort of on the outside of the skate rock, skate punk thing. And the reason I say that is I remember when I first got into Boston hardcore, someone said that people were jumping into the crowd on skateboards like they were going into a pool, which I don't know if that seems kind of rough. I know people used to put milk crates on their head and kind of do that thing in the pit, but I feel like going in like on top of a person on a skateboard would just not be a fun thing for anyone. But the reason I think it always had that is, the music on this record swings, and it swings so hard. And I think when music swings really hard like that, you can literally picture, like, and it's, someone in a half pipe or a pool. And it's just, the cadence of this music, lends itself to that, in my opinion. And it's also just like loud and cacophonous. And I remember when I first heard this record, and as well as the SSD record, Get It Away, my friend Peter Biebergall and Peter was one of the guys that got me into the punk rock. I brought him up on the 100th episode of this podcast, and he was on the first ever episode of this podcast. Great author at this point, and just a great guy. But anyway, he got me here to this kind of stuff. But him and I used to smoke a lot of Sensimilia and Colombian Gold. I was 13 or whatever, 14, and he was, I think, 16 or 17. And we would listen to these records. We would listen to Rudimentary Peni, Crass, Minor Threat, Scream, The Bad Brains, but then these the SSD Get It Away record and this Jerry's Kids record. And I remember he used to say it reminded him of an orchestra. And I think that's like an accurate thing, because it's like the music is so like tight and together, it almost forms like this giant like fucking wrecking ball. So it's like a big angry one-man orchestra. So if you think of it as like an orchestra, it's like an orchestra of big fucking dudes. I don't know. I won't go through all the songs here, but whoever had the final say in sequencing this record, whether it's a member of the band or Lou Giordano, should drink for free in Boston for life, or Braintree and Quincy area. But the songs are like they flow into each other so perfect. It's like you're in a boxing match and just getting like pummeled over and over, and it's like extremely fast and loud, and just like they were live. And then there's two sort of breaks where there's two slow songs. Raise the Curtain, which was covered by His Hero Is Gone. They do a great cover of that. And then Lost, which was sung by Bob Sensi. And both of these songs make me just want to punch the entire fucking universe in the face, which the whole album kind of does that. The record was recorded in 1983 at Newberry Sound, which I believe is the same studio as Synchro Sound, which I think was owned by the Cars or Benjamin. The only reason I think it was Ben Orr is because I remember seeing Ben Orr in front of that building on Newbury Street at one point in like the mid-90s, and being like, ooh, that's Benjamin Orr. We saw Rick Ocasek down there too once. But that's for another episode of this. We'll talk about various new wave guys from Boston and the times we saw him around. I could tell you about the Gary Sharon sightings. He's not new wave. So this, I think it's the same studio. And if it is, that's where the Bad Brains recorded Rock for Light. Ministry recorded With Sympathy, which I think I should do an episode on that record. I'm a fan of that record. And then, of course, the Cars Shake It Up. And then I think Romeo Void recorded there. And if I'm wrong that's a different studio, let me know in the comments or call me up. One thing this podcast has brought me is a number of new friends. At one point on an episode, I mentioned regretting selling records. And I think the ones I was talking about were The Kids Will Have Their Say, sealed copy I had that I sold at one point when I was moving. DYS Brotherhood. There's some Misfits 7 inches. The Necros records, Negative Approach 7 inch. All those gone. And, I was talking about how, I was sad because, a lot of these records were important records to me. And it sucks when you need money and you get rid of something like that. So I try not to do that at this point in my life. I try to just get rid of the shit stuff and, or just stuff that I've kind of grown out of. But stuff that's sentimental or, you want to keep like a core thing of records, You know what I'm saying. So anyway, this a good friend of mine, Brian Coleman, has a record store called Want List Records. Brian was on this podcast before. He's written a number of great books on hip hop, and he owns it with a gentleman by the name of Dave Belson, and the store is in Belmont, Mass. Want List Records. It's a great store. And they were initially in Newton or Needham. I always get those two places mixed up. And Dave was listening to the episode, that specific episode where I was talking about these records, and he said, he called me up. Well, he messaged me and said, hey, I have a copy of that Jerry's Kids record. If you want, I can sell it to you. So, of course, I sped down there, and that was like a 45-minute drive. And there's nothing like it's like kind of a boring drive. I'm a back roads guy because I'm old. So, I sped over there, and he sold it to me at a good price, and even a little bit, less than it was going for. So that was really cool. And he basically said, he heard the episode and said, I thought this would be better in your home. So that was really cool. So thanks again, Dave. That was one of the nicer things that's come out of doing this podcast. So this record, though, it's a super important one for me. I've been talking a long time here. And it's been reissued by Tang Records, which just isn't the same. And we could probably talk about Tang Records, which, for a long time. How come nobody's done a Tang Records podcast? This is a great Revelation Records one, Where It Went. And then You Don't Know Mojack, the great SST one. And there's a Discord one. Who's in, though? Tang Records. Let's do it. We could just call it something like Whack on the Map or something. But on a serious note, though, if you don't already own a copy of this record, grab yourself one. You probably won't find an original one for cheap. So steal your friend's copy, or just whatever you have to do to hear this 24 minutes of perfection. Just fucking do it.